All right, we got a 2004 Toyota Sequoia. I can't even say that. In here, rack and pinion's looking pretty bad, so we went and got a new rack for it. It's a fairly expensive little rack on this thing. Before I take anything apart, I'll get on there and show you what it's doing. It's looking pretty good out of the passenger side bellows, or the seal over there. So that'll be the first thing. We'll get on there and we'll see what it's doing. And then we'll start tearing this thing down and getting her fixed. Alright, you can see it's running out here at the end. Coming down here, dripping off. So anyway, it's leaking out of this side real bad, the passenger side here. Alright, so on a rat job like this, I like to pull the front wheels off and then knock the, but take your tie rods off. There's cotter pins in them, so you remove that cotter pin. This one's a 19 mil, so we'll loosen this one up and we'll do both sides at one time or before we move on to the next thing. Alright. So now you got the nut off. Normally you can hit it right here with a hammer and it'll release it. We'll give it a try and see what it does. Alright, so I just tapped it right here with the hammer sledge. And you can see it's loose now. Leave your nut on so it doesn't fall, but it's loose, so you can go ahead and take the nut off and then take it out. Just do the same thing for the other side, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, this side didn't want to pop off like the other side, so you might think yourself a tie rod separator. This is an OTC. Came with a front end kit that I bought a long time ago. Anyway, you just put this over it and then tighten it down. You don't want to use a pickle fork on these if you're going to reuse the tie rods, because you'll damage the boot. So anyway, and I think, you know, I was on the rallies and those guys rent these or lease them out or whatever. If you don't have one, but just be aware of that. Usually they'll come loose if you beat on it right here on the actual spindle itself. This one didn't. It was pretty tight, so I had to use this, and it pops it right out. So now those are off, I'll go to the steering shaft, and we'll get the lines off, and then it's a matter of pulling the actual rack down. So anyway, we'll get on that next. Alright, so I'm under the truck on the driver's side. Next thing you want to do is take these two lines off. They're 17 millimeter. Take the bottom one off first, obviously, because it's easier. It'll be easier to get to the top afterwards. So yeah, just loosen this one off, and then once you get this one out of the way, loosen the top one, which is right here. You're going to want a pan under here. It's definitely going to leak some power steering fluid. So just be aware of that, and get your 17 on there and get them loose, and then we'll hit that steering shaft after that. But got to move these out of the way first. And this is why you want a pan under it. The fluid actually shoots out. You can see the pan. So yeah, definitely want a pan on there. Let it drain out before you try to get to the top one, but it's pretty messy. All right, you got two 12 millimeter bolts up here. I took them out. I soaked down the steering shaft with some oil. It's pretty rusty, and it's not one to come. So I'm gonna let it soak a little bit and then move on. You got one here that's 19 millimeter, and you got to get to it from back over here, inside here. This nut's welded to the frame. You can't take this nut off. So you want to get a really good half-inch ratchet that's hopefully expandable or extendable, or a long pry bar, and break it loose, and then go ahead and, you know, there's enough room to get the bolt out. Doesn't look like there would be, but there is. There was quite a bit of rust in this one, so I soaked it down, and actually when I pulled it out, a whole bunch of rust came out. So it'll fight you a little bit starting out, but then hopefully it'll ease up as you go. And then once you get that out, we just have these three bolts here. I got these two, and you can see this rack bushing is wasted, so I'm gonna have to get one of those. I thought the new rack would come with one, because they used to, but now they don't, I guess. So we definitely got to replace this rack bushing. So anyway, there's two 19s on this. I think this is a 21, and then the rack should come down. So we'll get these two loose and get this one loose, and then I'll separate that, and this rack should come down. All right, so I got them laid out next to each other. You can see on this one, this is really rusty. The shaft that comes out that goes to your steering shaft. I had a hell of a time getting that off. I actually let it soak overnight because I had to stop the job anyway, do something else. But I let it soak overnight, and it's still, I had to take a long punch and really beat on to get that off. So that was really, if yours is rusty like that, that's going to be a pain. And then actually to get this nut off for your tie rod, that thing was super, super tight and rusty. So I don't know. That's the kind of things you run into sometimes. But anyway, you want to measure how far your tie rod is from the end of the threads here. You can count the turns. Usually that's what I do, is count the turns. I've been doing that for years. But on these, since I'm going to take this nut off, and the new rack didn't come with nuts, which is kind of, like I said, it's disappointing. You pay over $400 for this rack. Doesn't have new bushings, doesn't have the new nuts or anything, so that's a little disappointing. But anyway, find some way to measure from the end of the thread to your tie rod so that at least it's close for alignment. I mean, of course, they recommend you always get your car aligned if you put a rack in, which is probably good advice, but we'll get it real close to where it was. So anyway, find a way to measure, where it's at, and then we'll transfer from side to side. All right, so I got it pretty much back in there. There's not much to show where I can hold the camera and do it. On this one, on my steering shaft, on this one, it's real rusted out. Well, not rusted out, but rusty. And it won't slide up and down like it's supposed to. So I had to actually, normally you would put the rack up and then slide that up, hook it onto the rack. But I couldn't do that on this one because it's so rusty it won't slide. I even sprayed it down last night. It still won't slide. So I had to hook that up while I'm putting the rack up, which is a pain because you're hoping the steering wheel stays straight. I got as close as I can get it. This one might need alignment afterwards. I mean, you should align it afterwards anyway if you put a rack in, but this one might really be a strong candidate for it. So you put that in, and then I got, I got new bushing for this side. Tighten those bolts. Put your, I just got those started, the tie rods. Put your lines back in. Put the top one on first, and then the bottom. Just makes it easier to put them together that way. And then put your bolts in. And then you get the two bolts up there for the steering shaft. That's pretty much it. There's a small bracket that I have to hook back up for these two lines, basically. But that's all I'll have to do underneath here. And then we'll fill the system up and bleed it, and that should be good to go. So I'm going to finish putting this bracket on for these two lines, and then we'll go to the top and fill it up. All right, so you want to fill your power steering fluid level up to where it's cold. And then I got several adapters, but the one I have for this car doesn't work. But if you put this on there and hold it down, put it on your vacuum pump, your hand pump, and make sure you have a bottle in between. You shouldn't suck too much fluid up in that bottle, but you want to pump your vacuum up to about 15, 20 max. Usually I do about 15, and that'll suck all the air out of the system. And then, each rack has its own instructions. On this one, it says after you suck the air out, then run the wheels back and forth, not to lock, but almost to lock, 5 times, and then it should be bled out. And then you check your fluid again. So that's pretty much the process, bleeding it. With the engine off, you'll, get something like this to put in there. Hold it on. They actually have adapters. I got 4 or 5 different adapters. Of course, the ones I have don't fit this reservoir, but this does build pressure. This little fitting here, if I press it down, hold it, it will build pressure on my gauge and hold it. So find something to do that, and just pump it up about 15. Wait about 10 or 15 seconds, and then that should draw all the air out to the top of the system and be bled. And then, run it a little bit and check the fluid a couple times, and it should be good to go. So that's about it for these. Still got to do oil change on this, a few other things, so I'm pretty much done with it. But yeah, that's about it for these on the rack and pinions on these 04 Toyotas. If you find this video useful in any way or helpful, please like and subscribe so that we can reach more people. I'd appreciate it. Thank you, and we'll get this hoopty back on the road.